How's everybody doing? Let's light up the darkness. First, let me apologize for doing class an hour late today. Hopefully people, when it didn't start at 6 and you looked at the Facebook feed, that's always the place to check. And you saw we put up a notice that it's going to be an hour late. And I'm just so sorry. Couldn't be helped. We had to take care of some personal business. And we had to drive 4 hours to do it. And we scheduled everything to avoid traffic. But you can never tell what's going to happen, even within 50, 60 miles of LA. So that's why we're late today. And I apologize. Just wanted to mention a couple of things. People keep asking. Thank God our son is fine in Jerusalem. In fact, we're very proud of him. He and the other boys in the yeshiva. What did they do today? In addition to their learning, just to help the effort in Israel. So, all these boys, put on gloves and picked up rags and squeegees, and they cleaned out some family bunkers in Jerusalem, right? So these old bunkers that had been sadly neglected and were filled with raw sewage. And, they just got up there inches deep and said it was the most vile smell and task he's ever done. And they were happy and honored to do it. Just anything to help Israel in its time of need. Another thing that we can all do, we keep talking about it, is prayer. That prayer is action. So in addition to all the other ways that we can support our brothers and sisters in Israel at this time, we really have to be praying for them. There's a lot of different prayers you can say. Obviously, you can just pray from your heart. Please God, strengthen Israel, keep our brothers and sisters safe, let good triumph over evil, etc. And it's good to pray from your heart. But it's also tradition to recite psalms at this time. And 2 psalms that are very much used. In fact, in our minyan, we recite these now every morning responsively. So we'll just do one of those. Is Psalm 130, Psalm 121. Is also often used in times of crisis like this. But Psalm 130, it's very short, so I thought let's just do it together. And, I'll give a pause and you can repeat after me. So Psalm 130, a song of ascents. From the depths, excuse me. From the depths I have called out to you, O Lord. Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears be attuned to the sound of my plea. If you, Lord, keep account of sins, O Lord, who could stand? But with you, there is forgiveness. Therefore, you may be revered. I wait for the Lord. My soul waits. In his word I put my hope. My soul waits for the Lord more than watchmen for the morning. Right? My soul waits for Lord more than watchmen wait for the morning. More than the watchmen. You can fill in, more than the watchmen long for the morning. Israel, put your hope in the Lord, for loving kindness is the Lord's, and great is his power to redeem. It is he who will redeem Israel from all their sins. Traditional at this time, times of crisis, to recite Psalms, and Psalm 130 is a good one for that. When I realized that I wasn't going to make it home in time, not only not in time to start the class, but even to prep the class. Usually I spend an hour before the class preparing for it. Today I wasn't able to do that. When I get in a situation like that, I will listen to somebody else teach the daf, usually using All Daf. It's a nice app. which has a bunch of shiurim, right? So a bunch of different, well-known rabbis who teach Daf Yomi. But this is why I feel so good, and it's so important that we have this class, because it just what can I say, in the Daf Yomi world, in the religious Jewish world, right, in the Torah Talmud study world, like everyone who's doing Daf Yomi, went to yeshiva and has a very great grasp of Hebrew and Aramaic as well, but certainly Hebrew. And so whenever you listen to one of these, big rabbis teach a Daf Yomi class, I mean, every other word, and sometimes more than that, is in Hebrew. And it's just very difficult if the Hebrew's not that strong. I mean, at this point, my Hebrew's a lot stronger than it was. I've completed Daf Yomi and I'm teaching Daf Yomi, and we're more than halfway through it. I certainly am very familiar with the concepts that he's teaching. But all that Hebrew and all that jargon just makes it, just so inaccessible for people like me, who lack that background. And so, the fact that we have this class and we learn it together in English, and I try to give background and explanation whenever we bring in a new concept. I hope that this is of service to you and to people that might, not have an opportunity to learn otherwise. Okay, today's class, it's going to be Daf, we're doing Nun Zayin, right, page 57 here in Tractate Kiddushin, the 20th volume of the Talmud. And it's sponsored by my rabbi, Rav Yekusiel Kalmanson, in memory of Rabbi Shalom Dov Ber ben Chaim Yitzhak. Rav Yekusiel, thank you so much for enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. In that merit, may you and all your family and all your loved ones, and our minyan, who's among all your loved ones, may they all and may we all be showered in blessings. We say Amen. And may Rabbi Shalom Dov Ber ben Chaim Yitzhak ascend even higher to what I'm sure is already an incredibly lofty perch in the world of souls. We say Amen. Thank you, Rav, for enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. Who's in the house? Stephen in New Hampshire, David in Indiana, Karen in Northern California, Sharon in New Jersey, Bill in Mid-Missouri, Bella in Florida, Melissa in Great Neck, Elvis in New York, John in Maine, Shandor in the Bronx, Paula in the Great Northwest, Irma in Texas, and a bunch of people saying Amen. Thank God. You're so glad you're here. Marjorie says Shalom. And again, my apologies for starting an hour late, and I explained why earlier. Let's get to it. So we're continuing our discussion, the Gemara, on Mishna number 10 here in chapter 2. Basic concept. If a man tries to betroth a woman with items that it is forbidden to derive benefit from them, so then they did not create a betrothal. So items that it's forbidden to derive benefit from them is like orla, fruit from the first 3 years of growth of a fruit tree, or diverse kinds in a vineyard. If grapes and grain were grown together in the same plot, that's prohibited. Or the ox that gored and killed another ox or a person and it's sentenced to be stoned. Or now we're going to be talking about the heifer whose neck is broken, the egla arufa, because a body was found, and we don't know who the killer is, and there's a ritual that would be done in Israel when the temple was standing, and the Sanhedrin would actually come from Jerusalem, preside over this ritual, where this heifer, this cow, would have its neck broken. And so that cow exists for that purpose, but not for private uses of people, who would like to benefit from it, including using it to betroth a woman. So we pick this up on page 56b. Probably, about 2/3 of the way down the page. So the Gemara asks, regarding the ox that is sentenced to be stoned because it gored, because it killed, The Gemara asks, from where is it known that this phrase, its flesh shall not be eaten, comes to teach a law with regard to a case where the person slaughtered the ox after its verdict was reached, but before it was stoned, right? So we know that this ox has to be stoned, meaning it's going to be killed because it killed another ox or a person, but it's not going to be slaughtered. It's not going to be shechted, right, in a way that would be a kosher slaughter so that it could be eaten. Since it's not going to die by way of kosher slaughter, even though it's a kosher animal, it's not permitted to be eaten once it's stoned, right, once it's killed in that way. So how do we know that once it is sentenced to be stoned, but then before it is stoned, somebody comes along and performs a kosher slaughter on it? So now it's a kosher animal that was slaughtered in a kosher manner. So why is it prohibited to eat it? How do we know this? Perhaps it is permitted to eat the ox if he slaughtered it after its verdict had been reached. And this phrase, quote, shall not be eaten, maybe this comes to teach a law with regard to a case where they had already stoned it, but not to teach a prohibition against eating it, as that is already known due to the fact that it was stoned rather than kosher slaughter. So rather, it comes to prohibit deriving benefit from the ox. And that would be in accordance with the statement of Rabbi Abahu, who says the following, citing Rabbi Elazar. The Gemara continues the question. As Rabbi Abahu says that Rabbi Elazar says that whenever it is stated, quote, it shall not be eaten, or you shall not eat, you singular, you a single person, as opposed to y'all, right? It shall not be eaten, or you singular shall not eat, or you plural, like y'all shall not eat. So whenever it's stated this way, both the prohibition against eating and a prohibition against deriving benefit are indicated, right? Understand that from, grapes grown alongside grain, diverse kinds in a vineyard, you can't eat it, right? You can't eat the grapes, you can't eat the grain, you can't make bread out of that grain and eat it, nor can you sell it, right? That's what it means, that you can't derive benefit from something. You can't eat it and you can't derive benefit from it. Not any kind of benefit. You can't sell it for money. You can't use it to provide shade over you on a hot day. You cannot benefit from it. So how do we know this? This is so unless the verse specifies for you that one may derive benefit in the manner that it's specified for you with regard to a nevela, an animal carcass. Right? A nevela is an animal, a kosher animal, that died in some other way than kosher slaughter. So it didn't become prohibited in some other way. It's just that it wasn't slaughtered properly. So a nevela, you may benefit from it. You can feed it to your dog. You can sell it to a non-Jew that doesn't care whether it was slaughtered in a kosher manner or not. You just may not eat it, right? So that's a case where eating is prohibited, but benefit is permitted. But in these other cases, we're saying that both eating and benefit are prohibited. Yes. And the Gemara answers that the statement of Rabbi Abahu applies only to a case where we derive the prohibition against eating from the words, it may not be eaten, which is interpreted to include any manner of consumption. But here, the prohibition against eating is derived from it shall be stoned. It doesn't say it shall not be eaten. It says it shall be stoned, from which it is understood that since the ox becomes an unslaughtered animal carcass, it may not be eaten. Therefore, since it also says it may not be eaten, that's why we learn out no benefit. As if it enters your mind that the phrase its flesh may not be eaten is written to prohibit one from deriving benefit, so let the verse state, one may not derive benefit. Why does it refer to eating if that prohibition has already been derived? Must be that it comes to teach us no benefit. Alternatively, even if one would say the phrase, it shall not be eaten, can be used to indicate that it is prohibited to derive benefit from the ox, why do I need the additional words, its flesh? These words must teach that although he slaughtered the ox like one does with kosher meat, after it was condemned to be stoned, it remains forbidden and it cannot be eaten. Now, Mar Zutra objects to this analysis. He says, but say that this prohibition against eating the ox applies only where he examined a sharp stone to ensure that it had no nicks, and then he slaughtered with it in a halakhically acceptable manner. So that action could be considered like stoning, right? Because instead of killing it with a metal knife, he slaughtered it in a kosher manner, but with a knife made of stone. So perhaps that's what the Torah means when it says stone, like it is like stoning. And since in any event the ox was killed by a stone, right? There actually were knives made out of flint, and there are also knives made out of obsidian, right? Which is not a metal. It's a stone that can be made very, very sharp. And so the Gemara expresses surprise at this reasoning. Was a knife written in the Torah? If one slaughters the animal in a halakhically acceptable manner, this is called shechting, slaughtering, not stoning. And moreover, it is taught in a baraisa, one may slaughter with anything that cuts cleanly, whether with a stone, whether with glass, whether with the stalk of a reed. Consequently, there is no difference in the law with regard to using a knife or a sharp stone. So the Gemara asks, and now that we have derived both the prohibition against eating and the prohibition against benefiting from an ox sentenced to be stoned from the phrase, it shall not be eaten, so then what law does that other phrase, but the owner of the ox shall be clear? What does that teach? And the Gemara answers, it comes to teach the prohibition against deriving benefit from its hide after it has been killed. Were it not for this phrase, it might enter your mind to say that since it is written, its flesh shall not be eaten, that only its flesh is forbidden, either for eating or for benefit, but perhaps the hide would have been permitted. And so now that we say this, that the owner of the ox shall be clear, we understand that none of that ox can be used in any way for benefit, including its hide, even after it's been stoned. And the Gemara asks, and according to those Tanaim, the sages of the Mishna, who expound this phrase, the owner of this ox shall be clear, they expound it differently. They use it to teach that the owner of an innocuous ox, right, meaning an ox that has not shown previously its propensity to be dangerous, so that it was a surprise to everybody when it went and gored another person or an animal, right? That is an innocuous ox, a short tom. So the owner of the ox shall be clear. This teaches that the owner of an innocuous ox, i.e. one that is not known to cause damage with the intent to injure, this owner is exempt from the payment of half of the indemnity incurred if that ox killed a person, or that he is exempt from a payment of damages for miscarried offspring if his ox gores a pregnant woman and causes her to miscarry. From where do they derive this prohibition against benefiting from the ox's hide? Right? If they use that phrase to teach that the owner of an innocuous ox is not going to be penalized in the same way that the owner of a dangerous ox is penalized, then from where do those people learn out that the hide of the ox is prohibited? And the Gemara answers, they derive it from the wording, its flesh may not be eaten. Velo yachel es besaro. And the verse could have been formulated, Velo yachel besaro, which already means, and its flesh shall not be eaten. The addition of the word es, right? Meaning velo yachel es besaro versus velo yachel besaro, right? So that connecting word es, or right in people more Israeli Hebrew et, right? Aleph Tav, which is all over the Torah, hundreds and hundreds of uses of that word. And normally we don't translate it because it doesn't get translated. It's a connecting word. It doesn't have a meaning in itself. It's just used, it's a word that gets inserted because of the syntax of Hebrew, that sometimes when you have a direct object, you have to just insert this kind of linking word. But it doesn't have a meaning in itself, right? So when it is there, and sometimes it's included, but if it wasn't included, the Hebrew would make sense anyway. So, Hebrew's a moody language, so there are times that the et or the s is needed. It's mandatory. There's other times when it seems sort of just according to the rules of grammar, optional. So in those times, especially when it is included, it would seem like an invitation to the sages to interpret the presence of that word as teaching some additional law. So the verse could have been formulated without the s, the et, right? So the addition of the word et teaches that the prohibition applies also to that which is secondary to the flesh. And what is secondary to the flesh? The hide of the ox. So the Gemara asks, and the other Tana who derives the prohibition against benefiting from the hide from the verse, but the owner of the ox shall be clear, what does he learn from the additional word et? Now we're on 57a, and the Gemara answers, this sage does not interpret the word et as a means to derive a new law. He considers the word et to be an ordinary part of the sentence structure and not a source for exegetical exposition. As it is taught in a Baraisa, Shimon ha'Amasoni, and some say that it was Nehemiah ha'Amasoni, would interpret all occurrences of the word et in the Torah, deriving additional laws with regard to the particular subject matter in which the word was used. Now, once he reached the verse in the last book of the Torah, right, in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 13, you shall fear the Lord your God, right? You shall fear the Lord your God, right? Where it's written, Le'es Hashem Elohecha Tira, right? You shall fear the Lord your God, right? And sort of like, what's the direct object of you shall fear? The Lord your God. And so the et, it's actually put at the beginning, the object comes first, but at any rate, it's right to the Lord your God, or, connecting to the Lord your God, you shall fear. And when he reached this phrase, he couldn't figure out any additional meaning to take from the command, you shall fear the Lord your God, because of the presence of this word et, which it didn't really have to be there. Right? It didn't have to be there, but it is, and he couldn't figure out some additional law to derive from it. And so he withdrew from this method of exposition, as whose fear could be an extension of the fear of God. Right? You are obligated to fear God. Fear God. Yes. We often want to be kind of like gentle and a little bit politically correct and say, well, it's not, God is so kind and good. It's not that we should fear God. It's that we should be in awe of God. I myself have taught that many times. But let's not shy away from the plain meaning of the text. Awe is a viable, very viable translation of fear. Tira, yira. Having this awe of God for sure, but it also means fear God, right? In other words, that like you obey the commands because it's God, right? God is God. God made the world. God runs the world. And if God says do something, you do it, right? Now you should do it also because God is so good to us and we love God. But just as much as we do things because we love God, we do them because we fear God. It's a commandment to fear God. Now, once we're commanded to fear God, are we commanded to fear someone else? No. Is there some extra type of fear? I mean, I'm in the way that I was just talking. Yeah, but this great sage was saying, well, no, it's just simple, plain fear God. There is no additional law to derive from that. And so he said to himself, you know what? My life's work, and he had spent years, many years, deriving laws and interpretations from the use of the word et everywhere else in the Torah, hundreds and hundreds of uses. I mean, he had been working on this for decades. And then he comes to this verse near the end of the Torah and he says, I was wrong. The truth is I was, coming up with ideas and interpretations that I thought were right, but I think I was wrong. And he was just willing to say, what matters is the truth of the Torah. And maybe I did come up with valuable interpretations, but now that I've reached this, I realize that I'm not sure if I was right before, and I'm going to stop here. Right? And he's actually considered to be a man of tremendous courage and integrity Because what he could have said is, well, I could come up with something, add something here, and sort of self-justify this massive project that I've been involved in for so many years. But he said, know what? No, now I think it was wrong. And it's not like he threw away all those interpretations, but he stopped and he said it's questionable. And the truth is it's questionable, and I'm not going to just stick to my horses and defend, my master's thesis or my doctoral thesis or my, lifelong magnum opus just because it serves me. He says the truth is the truth. And then the teacher that I was actually listening to today, driving home, teach this page, was saying that this is comparable to what? To Moses, right? When Moses smashed the tablets. Because you could say, Moses bringing down the 10 Commandments from Mount Sinai. I mean, it was like probably the greatest moment in human history when God spoke to all the people and uttered the commandments. But after the first two, the people were like, we're going to die. It's too intense. Moses, you take dictation. You hear the commandments and transmit them to us. And so Moses received the commandments, and he comes down the mountain with the 10 commandments, and he's the guy, right? And it's like everything that he's done has been preparing for this moment. And he sees the Jews sinning and dancing around the golden calf. And he realizes that if this people is going to be bound in a contract to follow the law, and the first moment that the contract is delivered, they're in the midst of a terrible sin, they're all going to be sentenced to death, like all of them. So he smashes the tablets, right? Because so that they wouldn't all die. There's a lot of different interpretations why he smashes the tablets, but it's like they were not ready. It wasn't just because he had a hissy fit, right? It was what was necessary to do, even though he was fully innocent. And in a sense, it just totally undermined the 40 days and nights he had spent receiving the whole Torah and coming down with the 2 tablets. But he did what had to be done because it was the truth in that moment. And, this sage, it was Nehemiah Hasamoni, sort of stopping his interpretation of every use of the word et is, compared metaphorically to Moses smashing the tablets for that reason. Truth first, not what serves you. So at any rate, that's what he was doing. He was spent his whole life interpreting the use of the word et, and then he stopped when he came to this verse, you shall fear the Lord your God. So his students said to him, our teacher, what will be with all of the occurrences of the word et that you interpreted until now? And he said to them, just as I received reward for the exposition, so I received reward for my withdrawal from using this method of exposition. And the word et in this verse was not explained until Rabbi Akiva came and expounded, you shall fear the Lord your God. And the word et in that verse serves to include Torah scholars, i.e. that one is commanded to fear them in a manner similar to the way one fears God, not because they're divine beings, but because it is given to them in every generation to teach the rest of us what God wants from us. So we have to revere them and give them tremendous respect and not just disagree with them when their rulings are inconvenient for us. So that's how Rabbi Akiva expounded the word et in you shall fear the Lord your God. And so then people ask, well, how is it that this Nehemiah Hasamoni spent his whole life interpreting the word et everywhere in the Torah, but was unable to come up with this teaching that after all is not that complicated. But Rabbi Akiva came along and could see it, right? Rabbi Akiva had not spent his whole life interpreting the word et everywhere that it appeared, so how come he could see it when his teacher couldn't? Answer, because he had the example of his teacher, Nehemiah Hasamoni, who put the truth before his own scholarship and his own prominence and his own fame, etc., and said, you know what, maybe I was wrong. I'm going to stop. Right? And Rabbi Akiva saw that. He saw that the reason to fear, to revere, to respect Torah scholars is because they fear God and they put God and God's interests and God's Torah before their own interests. Moving on. The Mishna teaches that if a man betroths a woman with a heifer whose neck is broken, the egla arufa, which is a ritual, right? When we find a murder victim, a corpse, far away from any town, we don't know who it is, we don't know who killed him, we don't know what, and so we measure which is the closest town, and then the sages, the elders of that town, are joined by the sages from Jerusalem, members of the Sanhedrin, who come and perform this ritual of the heifer that's neck is broken. So the Mishnah teaches that if a man betroths a woman with this heifer whose neck is broken, she is not betrothed. And the Gemara clarifies, from where do we derive that one is prohibited from deriving benefit from a heifer whose neck is broken? The school of Rabbi Yanai said an expression of atonement was written with regard to it. The verse, atone for your people Israel, Deuteronomy 21:8, was written with regard to a heifer whose neck was broken, as was also written with regard to sacrificial animals, right? Because when blood is spilled in the Holy Land and the body is left unburied, and if it was the murder victim and we don't find the murderer and make sure that justice is served, right, then this is a stain on the land, and an atonement must be performed for it, or the people who live in that land will suffer. That's why this ritual is necessary. So the school of Rabbi Yanai said, an expression of atonement was written with regard to it. The verse, atone for your people Israel, was written with regard to the heifer whose neck was broken. And it was also written with regard to sacrificial animals. Therefore, one is prohibited from deriving benefit from it in the same way that one is prohibited from deriving personal benefit from sacrificial animals. The Mishnah teaches that if a man betroths a woman with the birds of a metzora, right? So the one who had tsaras, that skin condition, and then he needs to be purified from it once he is healed from the physical malady, which is a physical expression of a spiritual malady. So then he goes through a purification process, which includes bringing certain offerings, and among them a pair of birds. One bird is slaughtered, one is released. So from where do we derive that one is prohibited from deriving benefit from the birds of a metzora? As the school of Rabbi Yishmael taught, a mitzvah, a commandment that enables, is stated in the verses with regard to a metzora, and the Torah also discusses a commandment that atones, both of which are performed inside the temple when the temple is standing. Here, a commandment that enables is a reference to the metzora's guilt offering, which enables him to partake of offerings, and a commandment that atones is a reference to all the other offerings of the metzora. So, a mitzvah that enables is stated in the verses with regard to a metzora, and the Torah also discusses a mitzvah that atones, both of which enables, meaning, right, he can return. He can eat something, or he can return to the community. It enables him to do something. And a mitzvah that atones, right, is it atones for the guilt that he was guilty of something. That's why he became a metzora. Usually we say he was guilty of lashon hara, prohibited speech. Right, and the mitzvah that enables is stated with the verses with regard to the metzora, and the Torah also discusses a mitzvah that atones, both of which are performed outside the temple. Here, a mitzvah that enables is a reference to the birds of the metzora, which permit him to re-enter the camp. And the mitzvah that atones is a reference to the heifer whose neck is broken, which atones for the inhabitants of the city nearest to the unsolved murder. So, just as in the case of the enabling and atoning rituals stated in the Torah that are performed inside the temple made the item of the enabling ritual, i.e. the metzora's guilt offering, from which one is prohibited from deriving benefit, like the item of the atoning ritual, i.e. offerings in general. And so too in the case of the enabling and atoning rituals stated in the Torah that are performed outside the temple, the Torah made the item of the enabling ritual, i.e. the birds of the metzora, from which one is prohibited from deriving benefit, like the item of the atoning ritual, i.e. the heifer whose neck is broken. Now, it was stated, in other words, that's a sort of complicated way of saying that the birds that are used for the atonement of the metzora, we cannot derive personal benefit from them. it was stated that the Amoraim, the sages of the Gemara, disputed the following issue: from when is one prohibited from deriving benefit from the birds of the metzora? So Rabbi Yochanan says from the moment they are slaughtered. And Reish Lakish says from the moment they are taken out and designated to be the birds of the metzora, even while they're still alive. And the Gemara explains their respective opinions. Rabbi Yochanan says from the moment the birds are slaughtered, because it is the slaughter that prohibits them, since they are not consecrated before they are slaughtered. Reish Lakish says from the moment they are taken, since this law is derived from the heifer whose neck is broken. And just as one is prohibited from deriving benefit from a heifer whose neck is broken, even while it is still alive, right? But from the moment it's designated to be the heifer whose neck is broken, from that moment you can't derive personal benefit from it. So too, the birds of the metzora, from the time they're designated to act as the birds of the metzora, you can no longer derive personal benefit from those birds. And the Gemara asks, and with regard to it, the heifer whose neck is broken, with regard to that, from when is it a forbidden item? And Rabbi Yanai said, I heard the boundary, i.e. the stage beyond which it is forbidden, but I have forgotten what it is. Let us not feel so bad that we've encountered certain laws in our journey through Daf Yomi. We don't remember everything we've learned. Even the great sages who memorized the entire Talmud could forget a law from time to time. Right, so says Rabbi Yana, I heard from what stage the heifer who becomes the heifer whose neck is broken, from what stage it becomes prohibited for personal use, but I cannot remember when that is. But the group of scholars were inclined to say that its descent to a hard valley where its neck is broken is the action that renders it forbidden. So the Gemara asks, if so, just as with a heifer whose neck is broken, it is not forbidden from the moment it is taken, but only later, so too the birds of the metzora should not be forbidden from the moment they are taken, but rather their prohibition for personal benefit should begin a little later in the process. But the Gemara rejects this. How can these cases be compared? There, in the case of the heifer, it has another boundary that can render it forbidden, namely its descent to the valley where it will have its neck broken. Here, in the case of the birds of the metzora, does it have another boundary? It is taken, and after it is taken, it is slaughtered. So Rabbi Yochanan raised an objection to Reish Lakish from a baraisa. The verse states, quote, of all clean birds you may eat. Deuteronomy 14:11. Now, unlike fish, right, there's a rule. The Torah states a rule about fish. Which fish are kosher? Fish with fins and scales. Which animals are kosher? Animals that have split hooves and chew their cud, to the exclusion of a pig and a camel and so many other animals. With regard to birds, what's the rule? Is it a certain shape of beak? Is it a type of feather? Is it a wing structure? Is it that they fly or they don't fly? There's no rule like that. The Torah actually mentions a whole bunch of birds that are prohibited, and I think it mentions a bunch of birds that are permitted, but it doesn't give us a rule that we can follow. It says, of all clean birds you may eat, right? And then it tells us some birds that are clean. Deuteronomy 14:11. Now the superfluous word all is stated to include one of the leper's birds, the metzora's birds, which is sent away to freedom. While the words, but these are they of which you shall not eat, right? Then comes the list of birds that are prohibited for eating. And by the way, there are very, very, very ultra-Orthodox people that eat turkey. And there are very, very ultra-Orthodox people that don't eat turkey. Why? Because the turkey is not specified in that list of guaranteed clean birds, right? It's not that it says we can't eat turkey, but there's a list of clean birds and the turkey's not included among them. So some people who are incredibly stringent don't hold by the idea that the turkey is poultry, it's fowl, it's right, it's related close enough to a chicken and a duck, which I guess are listed, and so they don't eat turkey, but most people do eat turkey. At any rate, the superfluous word all is stated to include one of the metzora's birds, which is sent away to freedom, while the words, but these are they of which you shall not eat, are stated to include the prohibition, of the other slaughtered bird. So Rabbi Yochanan asks, and if it enters your mind to say that the bird is forbidden from when it is alive, is a verse necessary to teach that it is forbidden after its slaughter? If a bird is prohibited when it's alive, it's prohibited to you, right, for benefit, I guess. Is it necessary to say that after it's slaughtered, it's also prohibited? And the Gemara answers, the verse is necessary, lest you say, just as it is in the case of sacrificial animals, where one is prohibited from deriving benefit from them when they are alive, but then the act of slaughter comes and renders them fit to be eaten, in the case of a peace offering, right? So too with regard to the bird. And the verse teaches us that with regard to the birds of the metzora, this is not the case. The one that is forbidden for benefit remains forbidden for benefit even after it is slaughtered. Rabbi Yochanan raised another objection to Reish Lakish. The Mishna, tractate Negayim 14:5, teaches that if one slaughtered one of the birds of the metzora and it was found to be a bird with a condition that would have caused it to die within 12 months, that's a treifa, then a partner is taken for the second, i.e. the remaining bird. While with regard to the first bird, the treifa, one is permitted to derive benefit from it. And if it enters your mind that the bird is forbidden from when it is alive, why is one permitted to derive benefit from the first one if the prohibition took effect before it was slaughtered? And Reish Lakish said to him, with what are we dealing here? We're dealing with a case where the slaughtered bird was found to be a treifa in its inner organs, so that the consecration did not take effect at all, as the bird was not fit to be used for this purpose. Rabbi Yochanan raised another objection to Reish Lakish from a baraisa. If he slaughtered the bird without bringing a hyssop, or without bringing cedar wood, or without bringing scarlet thread, which were all used in the ritual, Rabbi Yaakov says, since the bird was set aside for its mitzvah, it is forbidden anyway. And Rabbi Shimon says, well, since it was not slaughtered in accordance with its mitzvah, it is permitted. Rabbi Yochanan infers from this they disagree only with regard to this issue, that one sage, Rabbi Yaakov, holds that an act of slaughter that is not fit for accomplishing its full ritual purpose is nevertheless considered an act of slaughter, and the bird is therefore forbidden. And the other sage, Rabbi Shimon, holds that an act of slaughter that is not fit for accomplishing its full ritual purpose is not considered an act of slaughter at all, and therefore one is permitted to derive benefit from the bird. But everyone agrees, at least, that one is not prohibited from deriving benefit from it when it is alive, but only after it has been slaughtered. Reish Lakish replied, I concede that this baraisa does not accord with my opinion. But this issue is a dispute between the Tanaim. As the school of Rabbi Yishmael taught, a mitzvah that enables is stated in the verses with regard to a metzora, and the Torah also discusses a mitzvah that atones, both of which are performed inside the temple. And a mitzvah that enables is stated in the verses with regard to a metzora, and the Torah also discusses a mitzvah that atones, both of which are performed outside the temple. And just as in the case of the enabling and the atoning rites stated in the Torah that are performed inside the temple, the Torah made the item of the enabling ritual like the item of the atoning ritual. So too in the case of the enabling and atoning ritual stated in the Torah that are performed outside the temple, the Torah made the item of the enabling ritual like the item of the atoning ritual. And the Baraisa of the school of Rabbi Yishmael compares the birds of the metzora to the heifer whose neck is broken, and therefore would also prohibit one from deriving benefit from the birds before they are slaughtered. The opinion of Reish Lakish is therefore in accordance with the Baraisa. Now with regard to the matter itself, the Baraisa teaches, the verse states, of all clean birds you may eat. And the superfluous word all, it could have said of clean birds you may eat, but it says of all clean birds you may eat. So what do we learn from the word all? The superfluous word all is stated to include one of the metzora's birds, which is sent away to freedom. While the words, but these are they of which you shall not eat, and these are stated to include in the prohibition the other slaughtered bird, right? Since the metzora is part of his ritual to complete his purification at the end of his tzaras, has to bring these two birds. One is sent away to fly away. The other is slaughtered. Now, the one that flies away, maybe someone catches it. Can he turn it into a racing pigeon if he knows that it was the bird that the metzora sent away as part of his ritual? So the Gemara questions this interpretation, and I will reverse the exposition and say that one may derive benefit from the slaughtered bird and not from the one that was sent away. Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, the reason to expound the verse as the Baraisa does is that we have not found kosher living creatures that are permanently forbidden with regard to eating. Therefore, it stands to reason that the slaughtered bird is forbidden, not the living one. And Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak objects to this explanation. How can you say that? But haven't we found kosher living animals that are permanently forbidden? But there are the cases of an animal set aside as an offering for idolatry. That animal can never be used for anything by a Jew. And an animal that was itself worshipped as an idol. These are living creatures, and yet they are permanently forbidden. And the Gemara answers there is a difference, as when they are forbidden only to be used for the Most High, i.e. to be used as offerings in the temple service. But it is permitted for a common Jew to derive benefit from them. Rabbi Yirmiyah objects, now we're on 57b. Rabbi Yirmiyah objects to the explanation of Rabbi Yochanan, but an animal that copulated with a woman, and an animal that copulated with a man in the presence of witnesses. They are living creatures, and yet they are permanently forbidden for any kind of benefit, as the law is that these animals are killed, and one is prohibited from deriving benefit from them once they have been sentenced. Rather, the above explanation should be amended to say, Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, we have not found most kosher living creatures that are permanently forbidden while they are still alive, and it can be assumed that the inclusion of the verse is referring to that which is generally forbidden, even if there might be the rare exception. And the Gemara offers another answer to the question of how the Baraisa knew which bird the verse is permitting for benefit. Is it the one that is sent away or the one that is slaughtered as part of the ritual purification of the metzora? The school of Rabbi Yishmael taught the verse states, and shall let go the living bird into the open field, which indicates that the bird is like a field. Just as a field is permitted, so too this bird is also permitted. And the Gemara asks, is that word field coming to teach this? That word is necessary for that which is taught in the Baraisa. The word field teaches that one may not stand in Jaffa and throw that bird that is set free toward the ocean, or stand in Givat and release that bird toward the desert. You're supposed to release it in the field, so you don't release it in the desert. You don't release it in the ocean. You have to release it in the field. That's why the word field is there. Rather, any manner in which he is standing in this, not stand outside, Givat, and throw it in the desert. And also the word field teaches that he may not stand outside the city and release the bird toward the city. Rather, any manner in which he is standing in the city and throws it outside the wall toward the field, this is valid. So the word field teaches that one must set it free only toward the field and nowhere else. Not to teach that the bird is permitted for personal benefit. And the other Tana, the school of Rabbi Yishmael, who derives that one is permitted to derive benefit from this bird based on the word field, would answer, if so, that this was the only law the word is teaching, then let the Torah write field. What is the significance of the field? Right? It says hasadeh, right? The field. It could have just said field. So that we can conclude two things from it. Both the place where the bird is released and the permission to derive benefit from it. Rava says a different answer to the question of how the Baraisa knew which bird the verse comes to permit. The Torah did not say let go for it to serve as a stumbling block. If the bird sent free was forbidden, the Torah would not have commanded him to send it away, since people might eat it unwittingly. Right? The Torah doesn't command us to perform rituals that might result in us or some other person coming to commit a sin. If you are going to tell me that the bird of a metzora that was used in the ritual purification of the metzora is never permitted for benefit, but he's releasing it in a field for it to fly away, well, it obviously could happen that some other person, a few miles away, ends up capturing that bird and, having it for dinner. So then he's benefiting from something that was prohibited for benefit. So the Torah would have created a situation in which people can come to stumble. The Torah will not put a stumbling block before the blind. And therefore, we know that the bird that is released of the two birds of the metzora, the one that is released is the one that is permitted for benefit. The Mishnah teaches that if a man betroths a woman, back to our Mishnah. The Mishnah teaches that if a man betroths a woman with the hair of a nazir, right? So a nazir is, or Nazirite, one who takes a vow not to benefit from the grapevine, not grapes, not wine, for a certain period of time, usually 30 days, not to cut his hair during that period, not to become impure for the dead, not to go to a funeral, not to enter a cemetery, not to come into contact with a dead body. And the fourth obligation is that at the end of that period, when his Naziris ends, he has to bring a bunch of offerings, which are the offerings of the Nazir. And one of the things he does when he brings those offerings is then, since he wasn't allowed to cut his hair during all the period of the Naziris, now he shaves his head. So, the Mishnah teaches that if a man betroths a woman with the hair of a Nazir, she is not betrothed. And the Gemara asks, from where do we derive that one is prohibited from deriving benefit from the hair of a Nazir? And the Gemara answers, as the verse states, with regard to the Nazir, he shall be holy. He shall let the locks of his hair, he shall let the locks of the hair of his head grow long. That's Numbers 6:5, which teaches that his hair growth shall be holy. Right, the hair that grew during his term of Naziris, that is holy hair. So the Gemara asks, if the hair of a Nazir can be compared to consecrated property by use of the term holy, then just as with regard to consecrated property, it transfers its sanctity to the money with which it is redeemed, and it can become desacralized. Well, so too, the hair of a Nazir should transfer its sanctity to the money with which it is redeemed. And the hair itself should become desacralized. If maybe the Nazir can sell his hair. Maybe he's not permitted to sell his hair, but what if he does it anyway? Right? So maybe he has to pay a penalty for that, but the one who bought it could now use it. This is not the law. And the Gemara answers, do we read holy, kodesh, in this verse, which is the term that the verse uses for the consecrated item? We read holy, kadosh, kadosh versus kodesh. Since a different conjugation of the term is used, the laws of the hair of a Nazir are not derived from those of consecrated property. The Mishnah teaches that if a man betroths a woman with a firstborn donkey, she is not betrothed. And the Gemara suggests, shall we say, the Mishnah is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, as it is taught in a Baraisa with regard to a firstborn donkey, deriving benefit from it is prohibited. This is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Shimon permits it. Rav Nachman said that Rabba Bar Avu said the Mishnah can be referring to one who betrothed a woman with a firstborn donkey after it had its neck broken. And everyone agrees that it is prohibited to derive benefit from the donkey once its neck is broken. But before that, maybe not. The idea is a firstborn donkey needs to be redeemed. And if the person refuses to redeem it, then it is killed. We don't eat it, obviously, but could you use that carcass to feed the dogs? That's what they're debating. I am almost done. So if you've got questions or comments, please get them in now. The Mishnah teaches that if a man betroths a woman with meat cooked in milk, she is not betrothed. Right? The Torah specifies 3 times, you shall not eat a kid cooked in its mother's milk. And from this we derive all the laws of kosher that have to do with we must never eat milk and meat together. Not only we don't eat a cheeseburger, we don't eat, cheese in the same meal as meat. You could eat cheese technically before meat, but you wouldn't have them on the table at the same time. And after you eat meat, you have to wait. Some wait 3 hours, most wait 5 hours, some wait 6 hours before they eat any kind of dairy. At any rate, the Torah says you shall not eat a kid cooked in its mother's milk. So if a man betroths a woman with meat cooked in milk, she is not betrothed. So the Gemara asks, from where do we derive that one is prohibited from deriving benefit from meat cooked in milk? Right? That says you shall not cook a kid in its mother's milk. That's what it says. It says it 3 times. So how do we know that this isn't just a prohibition against cooking a cheeseburger. And maybe we could say, okay, it's a prohibition on cooking a cheeseburger, and it's a prohibition on eating a cheeseburger, but is it actually prohibited to derive benefit from the cheeseburger? From where do we derive that one is prohibited from deriving benefit from meat cooked in milk? And the school of Rabbi Yishmael taught, the Torah states 3 times, you shall not cook a kid in its mother's milk. Exodus 23:19, Exodus 34:26, Deuteronomy 14:21. One verse serves to teach the prohibition against eating meat cooked in milk. One verse serves to teach the prohibition against deriving benefit from meat cooked in milk. And one verse serves to teach the prohibition against cooking meat in milk. Now the Gemara comments, the Mishnah is not in accordance with the opinion of this Tana. As it is taught in a Baraisa, Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda says, it is prohibited to eat meat cooked in milk, but one is permitted to derive benefit from it, as it is stated, for you are a holy people to the Lord your God. You shall not cook a kid in its mother's milk. And it states there, with regard to the prohibition of an unslaughtered animal, carcass, a nevela, and you shall be holy men to me. Now, since both verses employ the term holy, he derives, well, just as there in the case of the nevela, the unslaughtered animal carcass, it is prohibited to eat it, but one is permitted to derive benefit from it, right? If your animal dies, it's a kosher animal, and it dies before it was slaughtered in a kosher manner, you can't eat it, but you can feed it to your dog so you can derive benefit from it. So why not say you can't cook a kid in its mother's milk, you can't eat a kid that was cooked in its mother's milk, but maybe you can derive benefit from it. Just as there, so too here, with regard to meat cooked in milk, it is prohibited to eat it, but one is permitted to derive benefit from it. That's as much as I've got today, and I'll just tell you where this came out. It's very interesting. You may not cook a kid in its mother. You may not cook meat and milk together, not just a goat in its mother's milk, but you cannot eat meat. You cannot cook meat and dairy together. You cannot eat meat and dairy together, and you cannot derive benefit from meat and milk that you cook together. But if someone else, specifically a non-Jew, cooked meat and milk together, you could derive benefit from that. You can't eat it, but you actually could buy and sell a cheeseburger. Just confirm that. Meat cooked in milk. It is prohibited by Torah law to cook meat in milk or to eat meat cooked in milk. One who eats even a little bit, an olive bulk of meat cooked in milk, is liable to be flogged. One is prohibited from deriving benefit from this meat, and it must be buried, since deriving benefit even from its ashes is prohibited. One is prohibited by rabbinic law from eating a mixture of meat and milk that was not cooked together, no matter how the two were mixed. But one is permitted to derive benefit from it. Isn't that interesting? That's what I've got for us today. David Ruby, can one donate the meat to a Gentile, or would that be getting benefit from the ox? So interesting. The nevela, right, the unslaughtered carcass, that you could definitely donate to a non-Jew who could eat it. But the ox that is sentenced to be stoned, that we've derived, you can't even benefit from its hide. Can you donate that to a Gentile? No, I would say no, because we do learn elsewhere that the benefit of making a gift is a benefit, right? Just as you can choose which Cohen you're going to give teruma to, and that's a benefit to you because you form a relationship with that Cohen, with that priest. So too, if you give a gift, to a non-Jew, well, he's going to be grateful to you. So there's a benefit that way. Now, what you could probably do is, deriving no benefit from it, leave it in a place where someone will come along and find it, as long as it's not a stumbling block before the blind that would cause a Jew to benefit from it. Perhaps there's some aspect of, not letting it go to waste so long as you derive no benefit from it. I'm not sure about that. That would require further study. Nina says, I think 6 hours between meat and milk is standard, not 5. Yeah, but I've definitely heard that what a lot of people do is 6 is the standard, But some people will say that means 5 hours and a few minutes, right? Then you're in the 6th hour, and then that qualifies. This is something you definitely want to make sure you inherit a tradition from your parents, or you ask your rabbi, what does your community do? There's sort of different ways of following that law. That's something you don't want to just leave to chance and just kind of do what's convenient. You want to figure out where you stand on that and why, meaning ask your rabbi. That's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Thursday, at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. May there be peace in the Holy Land. May all good, innocent people be safe. We say amen.